Imagine this. You hear a siren. The sky lights up with a blinding flash. In seconds, cities vanish, millions die, and the world you knew ceases to exist. You run to the nearest shelter, hoping it's enough to survive, but even underground, nothing is safe. Radiation, hunger, fear, and the crushing weight of knowing billions didn't make it. Can humans survive a nuclear war? And if either, what kind of world will they wake up to? Stay with us, because the truth is darker and more terrifying than you can imagine. Can humans actually survive a nuclear war? The first hours of survival if a nuclear war begins. It will not start with explosions. It will start with silence. Somewhere above the Earth, satellites will detect missile launches within seconds. Deep inside command centers, screens will flash warnings that humanity is trained for, but hoped would never appear. From that moment, the world enters a phase where survival is decided not by courage or intelligence, but by timing and location. Missiles do not take hours to arrive. Intercontinental ballistic missiles can cross continents in under 30 minutes. For the people living in major cities, near military bases, or close to government centers, there will be almost no warning. Sirens, if they activate at all, may give only a few minutes. In those minutes, most people will not even understand what is happening. The idea of nuclear war feels too unreal for the human brain to process instantly. When the first warheads detonate, the destruction is immediate. At the center of the explosion, temperatures rise higher than the surface of the sun. Buildings do not burn, they vanish. Human bodies are instantly destroyed, leaving no chance for pain or escape. This zone of total destruction expands outward in seconds, wiping out everything in its path. For those slightly farther away, the shockwave arrives next, shattering concrete, flipping vehicles, and collapsing structures. Many people who survive the initial flash are killed moments later by debris moving faster than a hurricane. But the most dangerous part of a nuclear explosion is not what people see. It is what they cannot see. Radiation spreads silently through the air, attaching itself to dust, ash, and debris. Hours after the blast, radioactive fallout begins to fall back to the ground. People exposed to it may feel normal at first. They might think they survived, but inside their bodies, cells are already being destroyed. Nausea, vomiting, burns, and internal bleeding follow. For many, death comes days or weeks later, slow and painful. In this Chow's survival becomes extremely unequal. A very small group of humans has a chance, not because they are stronger, but because they are prepared and protected underground. Long before any missile is launched, governments plan for this scenario. Beneath mountains and cities, reinforced bunkers exist, designed to block radiation and withstand shockwaves. When warnings appear, selected individuals are rushed into these shelters within minutes. Once sealed, these bunkers become separate worlds, cut off from the surface. Inside these underground facilities, survival is controlled and calculated. Air is filtered to remove radioactive particles. Food and water are rationed carefully. Communication with the outside world is limited or completely shut down. People inside may survive the explosions and radiation, but they are trapped in darkness and uncertainty. They do not know if their families are alive. They do not know if the surface is habitable. Time loses, meaning when days and nights disappear. The psychological pressure inside these bunkers is something few people are prepared for. Humans are not designed to live underground for long periods without sunlight or fresh air. Fear, guilt, and isolation begin to affect even the strongest minds. Some survivors later describe this phase as worse than the explosions themselves. Living while knowing billions have died creates a heavy mental burden that never fully disappears. For the vast majority of humanity, however, there is no bunker, no warning, and no protection. Most people live above ground, in cities built for convenience, not survival. Basements and ordinary shelters offer little defense against radiation or collapse. Even those who escape immediate death face a world where hospitals are destroyed, food supplies are contaminated, and governments struggle to function. This leads to a terrifying realization. Surviving a nuclear war is not just about avoiding the blast. It is about surviving what comes after. The first hours decide who remains alive, but they do not decide who will continue living. Many who survive the initial phase will later die from radiation, injuries, starvation, or disease. So, can humans actually survive a nuclear war? In the first phase, the answer is yes, but only a fraction of humanity. Survival is determined by distance, depth, and preparation. It is not fair, and it is not heroic. It is cold mathematics. And this is only the beginning of the story, because even for those who survive underground, the real question remains unanswered. What kind of world will be waiting for them when they finally come back to the surface? Which countries might survive? And why geography matters after the first explosions and the initial wave of destruction. The fate of humanity no longer depends on missiles or bombs alone. It depends on something far older and more powerful than weapons. Geography. In a nuclear war, where you live on Earth can decide whether your country collapses completely or manages to survive in some form. Nuclear war planners do not target every country equally. The primary targets are nations with large nuclear arsenals, major military bases, and global political influence. These countries become the main battlegrounds because destroying them weakens the enemy's ability to respond. As a result, certain regions of the world are far more likely to be hit repeatedly, while others may experience little or no direct attack. Countries with dense populations and large cities face the worst outcomes. Urban centers are prime targets because they concentrate people, infrastructure, communication networks, and leadership in one place. When a nuclear weapon hits a major city, the death toll rises instantly into the millions. These regions may still suffer from fallout and economic collapse, but the scale of immediate death is far smaller. Geography also determines how nuclear fallout spreads. Wind patterns play a crucial role. Radioactive particles can travel thousands of kilometers, poisoning land far from the explosion site. Nations capable of producing their own food have a greater chance of survival. Agricultural land far from major targets becomes incredibly valuable. However, even farming is not safe from nuclear consequences. A phenomenon known as nuclear winter threatens global agriculture. Smoke and ash from burning cities can block sunlight, lowering temperatures and shortening growing seasons. Crops fail, not because the land is destroyed, but because the sun itself becomes weaker. Some regions of the world are more resilient to this effect. Areas closer to the equator receive more consistent sunlight, even during periods of global cooling. These regions may still grow limited crops, while others face total failure. In a post-nuclear world, this difference could decide which populations starve and which endure. Political stability also matters. In the aftermath of nuclear war, governments either maintain control or collapse completely. Countries with strong local governance and smaller populations may reorganize faster, while heavily centralized systems may fall apart when leadership and communication are destroyed. Without order, survival turns into violence as people fight over food, water, and shelter. Isolation, often seen as a weakness in the modern world, becomes a strength after nuclear war. Remote nations, distant islands, and regions with limited strategic value are less likely to be targeted. Their isolation protects them from both direct attacks and the worst effects of fallout. While life would still be harsh, these places might preserve some form of civilization while much of the world descends into chaos. However, survival does not mean safety. Even countries that avoid direct destruction face long-term consequences. Radiation affects ecosystems, oceans become contaminated, and global climate patterns shift. Diseases spread as healthcare systems collapse. Knowledge is lost when universities, laboratories, and digital infrastructure are destroyed. Humanity may survive biologically. This leads to an uncomfortable truth. A nuclear war does not end humanity in a single moment. Instead, it reshapes the world unevenly. Who dies first? Who survives the longest when the nuclear explosions stop and the missiles fall silent? The world does not suddenly become quiet or peaceful. Instead, it enters its most dangerous phase. In this stage, survival is no longer decided by blast zones or bunkers alone, but by how the human body, society, and environment react to prolonged collapse. The most shocking truth is that many people who survive the first day of a nuclear war will still die, just more slowly. The first to die are those who are exposed to high levels of radiation without immediate symptoms. Radiation is deceptive. It allows people to walk, talk, and even help others, while their internal organs are already failing. Within days, their immune systems collapse. Minor infections become fatal. Internal bleeding begins. Hospitals, if they still exist, have no medicine, no power, and no trained staff left to help. These deaths happen quietly, away from explosions, often in darkness and confusion. Soon after, injured survivors begin to die in large numbers. Burns from thermal radiation, deep wounds from collapsing buildings, and untreated fractures become deadly when medical systems fail. Antibiotics disappear within days. Clean water becomes rare. Even a small wound can turn into a life-ending infection. In a post-nuclear world, injuries that are easily survivable today become death sentences. Then comes starvation. Modern society depends entirely on constant food delivery. Most cities store only a few days' worth of food. After a nuclear war, transportation collapses. Fuel is unavailable. Roads are destroyed. Warehouses are contaminated by radiation. People begin rationing immediately, but panic spreads faster than logic. Food riots break out. Violence increases as hunger grows. Children, the elderly, and the sick are the first to weaken and die. As weeks pass, another invisible killer takes control. Contaminated water, rivers, lakes, and rainwater absorb radioactive particles. Without functioning water treatment plants, people drink poisoned water without knowing it. This leads to long-term radiation exposure that slowly destroys the body. Those who try to boil water gain little protection, because radiation cannot be removed by heat alone. While most of the population is fighting for basic survival, a smaller group begins to stabilize. These are people who avoided heavy radiation, have access to clean water, and can find or produce food. They are usually located far from major cities, often in rural or isolated areas. Survival here is still harsh, but it becomes possible. Life shifts from modern comfort to primitive routines focused entirely on staying alive. Among survivors, age becomes a powerful factor. Young adults often survive longer because their bodies can endure hunger, disease, and stress better. Children, however, suffer more from radiation exposure, as their growing cells are more vulnerable. Older adults face higher risks from infections and chronic conditions that can no longer be treated. Survival after nuclear war is deeply unequal, shaped by biology as much as circumstance. Mental survival becomes just as important as physical survival. Depression, trauma, and hopelessness spread quickly. Many survivors struggle with the loss of family, identity, and purpose. Suicide rates rise as people realize the world they knew is gone forever. In some cases, entire communities collapse, not because of lack of resources, but because of psychological breakdown. Those who survive the longest are not necessarily the strongest, but the most adaptable. They learn to live without electricity, without technology, and without external help. They form small communities based on cooperation rather than competition. Violence still exists, but groups that work together have a much higher chance of long-term survival than individuals acting alone. However, even long-term survival comes at a cost. Radiation exposure increases cancer rates for decades. Genetic damage affects future generations. Children born after nuclear war may suffer from birth defects and weakened immune systems. Survival does not mean escape from consequences. It means living with them permanently. Over time, nature begins to reclaim abandoned cities. Buildings crumble, roads crack, and forests grow where people once lived. Ironically, wildlife in some areas recovers faster than humans, as the absence of industrial pollution allows ecosystems to adapt. This creates a haunting image of a world where humans survive in fragments, while nature slowly takes control again. Life inside underground bunkers. When people imagine surviving a nuclear war, they often picture strong steel doors closing just in time, followed by safety underground. The idea of a bunker feels comforting, almost heroic. But life inside an underground bunker is not a victory. It is a psychological and emotional prison that tests the limits of what it means to remain human. The moment bunker doors seal shut, the outside world effectively disappears. No sunlight reaches inside. No fresh air flows naturally. Everything becomes artificial light, air, time, and even hope. People inside do not know what is happening above ground. News, if it exists at all, is delayed, limited, and often censored to prevent panic. The uncertainty becomes unbearable. Not knowing whether loved ones are alive is a pain that does not fade with time. Days inside a bunker blur together. Without sunrise or sunset, the human body loses its natural rhythm. Sleep patterns collapse. People wake up exhausted, confused, and emotionally unstable. Studies from long-term underground experiments show that even trained professionals begin to suffer memory loss, mood swings, and reduced cognitive ability after extended isolation. Simple decisions become difficult. Arguments start over trivial things. Space inside bunkers is extremely limited. Privacy almost disappears. Every sound echoes. Every movement is noticed. Small conflicts grow into serious confrontations because there is nowhere to escape. In such environments, leadership becomes fragile. One mistake, one emotional breakdown, can create chaos that threatens everyone's survival. Food inside bunkers is another harsh reality. Meals are designed for efficiency, not comfort. Rations are bland, repetitive, and strictly controlled. Eating stops being a pleasure and becomes a reminder of how long survival must continue. Over time, malnutrition weakens the body and mind, making people more vulnerable to stress and illness. Air is perhaps the most frightening dependency. Bunkers rely on filtration systems to remove radioactive particles and recycle oxygen. These systems must function perfectly. A single mechanical failure could mean suffocation or radiation exposure. The constant awareness that survival depends on machines creates deep anxiety. People begin to fear not the outside world, but the walls around them. Social bonds inside bunkers change rapidly. Some people form intense emotional attachments as a way to cope with fear and isolation. Others withdraw completely, becoming silent and distant. In extreme cases, paranoia develops. People begin to suspect one another of hiding information or resources. Trust, which is essential for survival, becomes fragile. One of the most difficult challenges is deciding when to leave. Staying inside too long risks running out of supplies. Leaving too early risks radiation, exposure, and death. This decision is not clear-cut and cannot be solved with technology alone. It becomes a moral and psychological burden placed on those in charge. Every day, underground raises the same terrifying question. Is the world outside dead or just waiting? Even when bunkers open, survival does not suddenly improve. People emerging after months or years underground often struggle to adapt. Their muscles are weak. Their eyes are sensitive to light. Their minds are overwhelmed by open space. Some experience panic attacks when seeing the sky again. The outside world, even if partially habitable, feels alien and hostile. The emotional damage lingers long after physical survival is achieved. Many bunker survivors describe a sense of guilt for having lived while billions died. This survivor's guilt becomes a permanent psychological scar. Life, after emerging from a nuclear bunker is not a celebration. It is a confrontation with a world that has been completely transformed by fire, radiation, and human collapse. For those who survived underground, stepping into sunlight again is both a relief and a shock. The landscape is unrecognizable. Cities that once thrived are now skeletal ruins. Roads are cracked and twisted. Forests may have begun reclaiming concrete, but the air is heavy with smoke and radioactive dust. The earth itself feels hostile, not welcoming. The first challenge is simple but critical. Survival outside. Water sources may be contaminated with radiation, making drinking unsafe. Rivers and lakes that once sustained millions may now carry invisible killers. Even rain can carry radioactive particles. Food is no longer easy to find. Farms have been destroyed, supply chains collapsed, and supermarkets are long empty. Humanity's dependence on modern infrastructure becomes painfully clear. Without it, basic survival is a daily struggle. Those who emerge must navigate a new social landscape. The majority of the population, those who did not have access to bunkers or protective zones, has been wiped out. Entire communities are gone. This creates two paradoxical outcomes. Some areas are eerily quiet, almost ghostly, while others descend into chaos as survivors fight over the remaining resources. Violence becomes a constant risk, even for those who were once law-abiding and peaceful. Survival demands constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and sometimes morally difficult decisions. Radiation is still an invisible enemy, even in areas far from direct attacks. The lingering fallout can cause slow but deadly health effects. People may experience nausea, fatigue, hair loss, and weakened immune systems. Long-term exposure increases the risk of cancers and genetic mutations. Children born after nuclear war are particularly vulnerable, with many potentially suffering from congenital disabilities or compromised immunity. Survival, in this sense, is not just about reaching the surface, it is about enduring a lifelong battle against invisible hazards. Psychological recovery is equally daunting. The trauma of watching the world collapse while safely underground cannot be easily erased. Survivors carry memories of explosions, death, isolation, and guilt. Many struggle with depression and anxiety, haunted by the faces of friends and strangers who did not survive. Even when physical safety is achieved, emotional and mental survival remains fragile. Some survivors may never fully reintegrate into the world above, living in constant fear or detachment. Rebuilding civilization is a monumental challenge. Technology, culture, and knowledge have been lost or severely disrupted. Universities, hospitals, and factories are destroyed. Internet and communication networks are down. Even basic engineering knowledge may be inaccessible. In many regions, humanity must start over with primitive tools, local resources, and manual labor. This is not merely survival, it is survival coupled with the impossible task of regaining what has been lost over centuries of progress. Yet, some communities adapt. Small groups form, often based on trust, cooperation, and shared experience. Agriculture resumes where the land allows. Rainwater is filtered, seeds are planted, and tools are crafted from remnants of the old world. Trade may begin on a small scale between communities that were isolated. Over time, these efforts can stabilize pockets of human civilization, but the process is slow and fragile. Every setback, a drought, illness, or radiation hotspot threatens to undo progress and plunge survivors back into chaos. The physical world, too, has changed. Climate patterns are disrupted by the fires and smoke of nuclear war. Crops fail in areas that were once fertile. Winters may be longer and harsher due to nuclear winter effects. The natural world begins to reclaim abandoned urban areas. But this is not always beneficial for survivors. Overgrown structures and forests can hide dangers. Wild animals, structural collapses, and hidden radiation zones. The Earth has become simultaneously hostile and strangely alive. Even with these challenges, humanity's instinct for survival is relentless. Those who emerge from bunkers are determined, resourceful, and willing to endure hardships unimaginable before the war. Communities rebuild slowly, memories of the past shaping their approach to the new world. The process is painful, terrifying, and uncertain. But it is also a testament to the resilience of human life. The long-term future and the cost of survival, surviving the immediate explosions, months underground, and the first harsh years above ground is only the beginning. The final challenge for humanity after a nuclear war is not merely staying alive. It is rebuilding civilization in a world that has been shattered in every possible way. The Earth itself has been transformed, and the legacy of destruction leaves a permanent mark on those who remain. One of the greatest long-term obstacles is radiation. Even years after the initial blasts, contaminated zones remain deadly. Cities that were once thriving become permanent no-go areas, full of crumbling buildings and invisible radioactive particles. Some regions recover faster than others, depending on wind, rainfall, and geography. But the overall impact on agriculture, water supplies, and human health is devastating. Food production is limited, and famine becomes a constant threat. Humanity may survive physically, but the specter of hunger, disease, and mutation lingers indefinitely. Technology and knowledge, pillars of modern civilization, face their own crisis. Laboratories, libraries, and digital archives are destroyed or inaccessible. Skilled engineers, scientists, and doctors are few, and much of the accumulated knowledge of humanity may be lost. Survivors face the difficult task of relearning skills that were once taken for granted. Growing food efficiently, purifying water, building shelters, and producing energy. The world may regress technologically by decades or even centuries. Every generation of survivors carries the burden of rebuilding without the safety net of the old world. Social structure is another fragile element. Communities that survived may initially work together, but scarcity, mistrust, and trauma create tension. Leadership becomes essential, yet difficult to maintain. The mistakes of governance in this new, harsh environment can result in internal collapse, civil conflicts, or even the disappearance of small human populations. Humanity's future depends not only on survival of the body, but on the ability to create functional, stable societies from the ruins of old ones. Psychological scars also define the long-term human experience after nuclear war. Survivors must live with memories of family lost, friends gone, and cities erased. Guilt over having lived while billions perished is common. Children born after the war grow up in a world defined by scarcity, fear, and stories of devastation. Trauma is passed down, shaping societies in ways that may affect behavior, politics, and morality for generations. Survival comes at the cost of mental stability and cultural continuity. Nature, ironically, becomes both an ally and an adversary. While radiation zones make some areas uninhabitable, other regions recover surprisingly quickly. Forests grow over cities, rivers clean themselves over time, and wildlife often thrives in the absence of humans. Yet these natural recoveries do not always benefit survivors who struggle to find safe land, cultivate crops, and rebuild infrastructure. The Earth is healing, but it is a world that humans must learn to navigate differently than before. Long-term survival is possible, but it requires radical adaptation. Communities must become self-reliant, developing agriculture, water filtration, and shelter systems independent of the old global network. Education must focus on survival skills and rebuilding knowledge from scratch. Cooperation becomes more valuable than competition, as small groups that work together are far more likely to persist. In this sense, survival is not just biological. It is social, technological, and cultural. The final question arises: is survival worth it? The answer is complex. Humanity may endure physically, but at enormous cost: millions of lives lost, generations affected by radiation, knowledge erased, and societies fractured. The world survivors return to is alien, harsh, and unforgiving. The pain, loss, and struggle to adapt define the very act of survival. It is a victory that feels hollow in the shadow of what has been destroyed. Yet, if humans can survive, adapt, and rebuild, they demonstrate the resilience that has allowed our species to endure countless challenges. Survival is not just about avoiding death. It is about the will to continue despite the impossibility of the circumstances.